Hi, everybody. This is the Hungry Math Professor here, and thank you for coming to my channel and checking this video out. So today we're going to be discussing Journey to the Edge of Reason, The Life of Kurt Gödel by Stephen Budiansky. There you see a picture of Kurt Gödel. And I really enjoy this book. It's a biography of Kurt Gödel, so it follows his life from childhood all the way up to his death. And it was written in 2021. And I've been obsessed with Kurt Gödel and his theorems for quite some time now. I'll talk a little bit more about that in another video where I'll dive into the actual theorems themselves and the proofs via another book that I really like. But here, I'll focus mostly on the life of Kurt Gödel. And um, I'm not going to try to recount every little detail in the book. I'll let you read it. It's a very good book if you're interested in these kinds of characters, or if you know some things about Kurt Gödel, or if you watch my discussion of the Maniac and are interested by how he intersects with John von Neumann's life and want to get a deeper look at his life himself. This is a great place to do that. And the author also avoids a lot of the very technical things that require more of a mathematical maturity to understand, and does a good job of just giving you the idea of what's going on and how it impacts history. So you may be interested in reading this book after this discussion. So Kurt Gödel lives from 1906 to 1978, and he while you read this book, you also get to kind of relive or remember the history of Europe through World War One and World War Two, how it affects, in particular, Kurt Gödel's life, but also how it's affecting Europe. And but in particular, one of the things that Kurt Gödel is famous for is that in his dissertation, he proves what's called Gödel's completeness theorem. This is in 1929. He's 23 years old at the time. That's quite young to get your PhD, but perhaps not super unusual for these like really intelligent prodigy types. And then 2 years later, he releases the Gödel's incompleteness theorems, which are these really big deal theorems that have huge implications for the foundations of mathematics, and in particular Hilbert's formalism, formalist position in the philosophy of mathematics. This came up in, again, my discussion of the Maniac, that you might remember there, you might want to watch now. And also I'll discuss those theorems in way more detail in another video. But this is a big part of what makes Gödel um, famous at this point in his life. Um, but just like a lot of intellectuals at the time, eventually he is forced to flee Europe to try to flee the Nazis and what's going on there. And so he winds up taking a position eventually at IAS, the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey, which is still there today. And many, mathematicians and physicists and philosophers and various different European intellectuals came to the US during that time. And a lot of them wound up at the Institute of Advanced Study, including John von Neumann that came up in that other video, and also Einstein. And one thing that's interesting is that um, Kurt Gödel and Einstein developed this really close friendship. They're like, the story is that they would walk around IAS together almost daily and just kind of like talk about ideas that they're working on or whatever else they're talking about. But there's 27 years difference, right? So Einstein's 27 years older. And one more thing I wanted to add to this is that throughout Kurt Gödel's life, there's this title, Journey to the Edge of Reason. There's two senses, I think, in which that title is important. One is has to do with his incompleteness theorems, and I won't touch that too much in this video. But maybe I can bring that up in another place. His theorems, though, somehow get to the edge of reason in some metaphorical sense. But I think also in Kurt Gödel's life, there's constantly this air of mental health issues. And so I think the title is also meant to be understood in this journey to the edge of reason within his own mind, and on the edge of um, you know, something that we might call like a psychotic events instead. And in any case, the reason why I bring that up here with when it comes to Einstein is you get the sense that Einstein was this very calming presence for Gödel. I think they obviously really respected each other and they enjoyed talking to each other. And I suspect that Einstein was able to, at times, calm some of Gödel's worries and paranoia about how he was being received in the field, and whether he was working enough, or how he was being his personal life, and all kinds of things like that. But they were 27 years difference in their age, Einstein being 27 years older. So eventually Einstein dies, and there's this sense in the book, and I've heard it other places, that Gödel was, really missing this important friendship in his life after that, because Gödel lived 23 more years after that. And I suspect that that was not helpful at times for some of his paranoia, losing that friend. One thing in particular I wanted to bring up is that Gödel was invited to give the Gibbs Lecture at the American Mathematical Society's meeting in 1951. And again, it's interesting because I have this other book I want to bring up that I won't do a separate video of, but this is Kurt Gödel's Unpublished Philosophical Essays. In here, you can find the entire transcript of his lecture that he gave at that Gibbs Lecture. But in the book, the biography, you also see that Gödel worked on this lecture for a while, like a long time he was working on it. And he was like really worried about it not coming off the right way. And it's interesting because Gödel was very interested in philosophy of math, maybe much more than I usually expect from mathematicians. And so in that lecture, one of the things I find very interesting is that he represents a Platonist view of mathematics, this idea that mathematical objects are real in some sense. They're not in the physical world, but they are real in some other realm. And we're not going to be too specific here about how that makes sense. But I just wanted to read a little quote from the author and then from Gödel from this point in time about the essay. So in the Gibbs lecture, Gödel marshaled several powerful arguments against the notion that mathematics is nothing but a creature of man's own invention. To begin with, the very act of mathematical creation shows very little of the freedom a creator should enjoy, as the creature almost immediately begins to take on a life of his own and goes on to defy and make demands on his creator in other ways. And then this is Gödel talking. Even if, for example, the axioms about integers were a free invention, still it must be admitted that the mathematician, after he has imagined the first few properties of his objects, is at an end with his creative ability, and he is not in a position also to create the validity of the theorems at his will. And of course, I think many people wouldn't disagree with that particular quote, but his point is that there must be something about mathematical objects that makes that come to be, right? If they were purely our invention, then why would they have this certainty to them? Why wouldn't we be able to have more control over our own invention, right? So I don't want to talk too much about that, but I really find that fascinating, and that's part of why I bought this other book, because I wanted to read some of his essays in particular on philosophy of mathematics, and it is very interesting to take a look. But again, when you study Gödel in this book, you see this like paranoid, socially awkward, frail, and soft-spoken titan of logic and mathematics. That sort of tension between this frailness and this soft-spokenness and this paranoia and this complex thing that's going on in his head. It often feels like he has a hard time like interacting with the world outside of him. But then inside his head and what he's able to think about and talk about with the intellectuals around him, he's just a titan of logic and mathematics, and just the respect that all these really big names in physics and math and philosophy at the time have for him, just is such a testament to who he was as a person. But then toward the end of his life, he was paranoid that he was going to get poisoned by people, and so he would only trusted his wife, Adele Nimbrowski, to feed him. But at some point, his wife was also getting old and needed to get hospitalized. So now he refused to eat at all because he couldn't have his wife feed him, and he distrusted other people, and so he eventually died of malnutrition. And I'll let you read the book to get more and more details. I'm just trying to tease it out and point to the things I find most interesting. Something else I want to just point to before I end this video is that in the very end, Stephen Budiansky gives a short, only 3 pages, idea of the proof of Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which is quite special because 3 pages is not much to try to explain this theorem. So he really is just trying to give you the idea. It's hard for me to say how successful because I already know the proof and I'm already familiar with a lot of the details. But I'd be curious if you check it out. It's only 3 pages. Give it a shot and see how much you understand. I'd be curious how well you think he did at describing that. And I'll just end the video by reminding you to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel because there's going to be many more videos coming about all kinds of different books that I've read. And I appreciate you sticking around, and I'll see you at another discussion.